Well, hello everyone. My name is Scott Stevenson, and I am a brand ambassador for Daniel Smith. I have the distinct honor of coming to you from San Francisco, California, which is where I'm located. Daniel Smith is located out of Seattle, Washington. Um, just a little bit more about me. I am the brand ambassador who is primarily charged with doing education for retail stores and also watercolor societies here in the U.S. and in Canada. I wanted to give a special shout out to my wonderful friend Wendy from Tennessee Watercolor Society, who's here today. Always enjoy the support of Wendy and her team. But I get to go all over the U.S. So I get to go pretty much from every corner of the U.S. to half of Canada, and I get to travel all over the place and just talk about all of the wonderful things about Daniel Smith and how we're different. My art journey actually got started in 1997 when my son was a newborn. And at the time, I was working three jobs, and I was working with the U.S. Forest Service as a firefighter. I had another job with Boeing Fire Department where they made the airplanes. And then if I had any time left, I worked as a rental tech to help size people to snow skis. So even with three jobs, I still had to figure out a way to get my wife some sleep somehow. So the way that I was actually able to do that was with watercolor. And one of the things that was crazy is that my son woke up in the middle of the night like clockwork. He would wake up at 1:15 in the morning. You could set your watch to it. And then he wouldn't fall asleep until sometime closer to 4. So the nights that I had to wake up and hang out with my son, the way that I stayed awake was actually with watercolor. So I had my son in my left arm and my brush in my right, and I would paint, and he thought it was great fun to try and reach over and grab my brush, and I'm sure if we went back and looked at my work back then, you would I'm sure it'd be some great examples of abstract painting for sure. So, but anyway, so I got started with just kind of an inexpensive set of praying watercolor. And I was fairly happy with it until I had a friend give me a tube of the Daniel Smith Mayan Blue, and I was absolutely wrecked. Um, Suddenly, the veil was lifted from my eyes, and then suddenly, nothing, those colors from that other manufacturer could kind of measure up to what the Daniel Smith, that one color of Daniel Smith could do. So I became one of these guys who would pick up every penny, nickel, and dime that he found so that he could save for his next tube of paint. And so you can imagine, what happened, the day that I got a phone call from Catherine Taylor, who's the president of Daniel Smith. And she asked, hey, how would you like to come work for this? And I really thought I was being pranked. So I have these friends, and I love them all. But one of the things that we do is that we prank each other. And I was pretty sure that one of my friends had put their moms on the phone and was kind of playing a joke on me. So, I'm listening to her, and she's, saying, yeah, we would love for you to start soon. And I was like, well, I think I need to think about it for a minute. And, could you give me the weekend or whatever? And then, and I was just like, they're not going to get me on this one. So towards the end of the phone call, the alarm bells go off in the back of my head. And it was like, what if this is her? And suddenly panic went off in the back of my head and said, well, maybe I better just cover my bases here. They're going to laugh at me for a week, and it'll be over with. So I said, yeah, sure. Absolutely. You know what? Let's get this going. Let's start on Monday. And she said, great. And she said, well, what can we send you to get started? And I was just like, really? I get free paint? And she was just like, yeah, let us send you a few things. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, what should I ask for? And she says, well, you know, well, we definitely have some really cool colors. And I said, well, you know what? I think I need all of them. How am I supposed to know what I want unless I try them? So she thought that was pretty hilarious. And she said, well, I'm sure if you work at it for a few weeks, you'll figure out a way to get all of our colors. And, of course I did. I couldn't let that off, let that off or go. But anyway, it really kind of kicked off what's really been kind of a transformational part of my life in terms of discovering who I am as a person, but also who I am in my career. And I'm grateful every day that I get to work with a company like Daniel Smith and to give me the wonderful opportunities that I've had because of it. So I'm very appreciative to the Daniel Smith team and everything that they've done for me. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. So let's talk a little bit about how things are going to go today. So this is meant to be a conversation. I love questions. If you ever have questions, just put them in the chat. My good friends Lauren and Jessica, they'll all kind of look at those and interject when they feel that it's a good time. But really, this is all about you. I want to help you enhance your knowledge of watercolor. We're going to talk about things like how we make our paint, our history. We're going to talk about things like granulation and light fastness. And we'll also talk about some other things that are kind of unique to Daniel Smith. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about how we do things. That'll also include a conversation about our color chart and how to read that. We'll also look at colors at the end. I'll actually paint out some of my favorite colors and maybe some of my favorite color combinations or blends, and we'll do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we're going to go here and make that bigger. So this is just kind of one of my favorite pictures here. So this is actually a picture at a trade show in Germany that I was at, but it's one of the cool pictures in showing, with some of our minerals. But our history actually gets started in 1976 at the University of Washington, where this gentleman right here, Mr. Daniel Smith, is working at the department at the university where they print the school newspaper. So that's kind of where Dan got his start. And one day him and his friends were standing around the printing press at the school where they were working on the newspaper. And they started having trouble with the ink. And the big problem is just that it wasn't really leaving a good impression on the newspaper, on the paper itself. So they went around the room asking, hey, do you guys know of a better ink, or do you think you can make a better ink? And so it kind of went around the room and nobody really wanted to do it. And then finally it came around to Dan, and Dan was always kind of an entrepreneurish kind of guy. Very curious about a lot of different things. And, he said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. I want to see what I can do here. So he went ahead and he found the best black pigment he can find and the best oil-based binder. And he brought it back to his parents' basement, which they lived in Bellevue, Washington at the time. Bellevue is a suburb of Seattle. So anyway, he had the ingredients and he brought it back to the school and made the ink, and they brought it back to the school, put it on the press, and it was much better than what they were using. So Dan started making all of this ink for the newspaper, and it didn't take long for the school art department to hear about this new ink that the newspaper was using, and they wondered if Dan could produce a batch for himself. So Dan said yes, of course, and he made them a batch, and they brought it back to the art department, and they loved it so much so that they came back and asked them to make it in about 5 or 6 other colors. So he went ahead and did that and came back, and the school was loving it. The classes were using a bunch of it. And then all of a sudden, Dan started to see the orders for the ink just absolutely skyrocket. And it was kind of a tough thing because he was trying to keep his job at the newspaper. Then at night, he would go ahead and produce the ink while he was home. So he was literally like working 17, 18 hours a day. So here's a cool picture of Dan and his two friends working, producing the ink way back when. Dan is actually the guy that is sitting down there at the mill. So so as I mentioned, Dan is starting to work 17, 18 hours a day, and he's curious as to how the school is going through so much of this ink. And so he's just like, where is all this coming from? So one day he's walking through the parking lot to get on the motorcycle, on his motorcycle to head home, and he sees a car with its trunk open in the distance. And it's one of those rare Seattle days when the sun is shining and there is a very bright reflection coming from the trunk of this car. He has no idea what it is, and he's kind of fascinated by it. So he keeps walking towards the car with the reflection, and then the closer that he gets, he realizes what it is that's causing the reflection in the sunlight. And it's those shiny tins that you see in the background there that is catching the reflection of the sun and is reflecting towards him in the parking lot. So the closer that he got, it was just like, holy cow, those are the tins that I'm using to put my ink in. So now it kind of started to click with him. And he said, well, now that I know how to make ink, I wonder if I could learn how to make paint. So he went ahead and decided to give it a try, and he produced his second product, which was the Daniel Smith original oils. So those paints were in existence for quite a long time, but it wasn't really until just recently that we discontinued those. But that was Dan's original, or his second product was the oils. So it wasn't until 1993 that Dan decided that he wanted to make watercolor. But the problem was he didn't really know what artists wanted. And he had a really steep learning curve. So one of the things that Dan learned early on, that if you wanted to know how to make a product for artists, you better well be able to talk to them as well. So he wanted input from artists. So he did a lot of traveling. He traveled to Europe and Asia to talk with watercolorists at festivals and things like that, and get information about how they would want a watercolor to perform. So he talked with a number of artists. He took that knowledge back with him to Seattle, where he went ahead and sourced some more pigment. And he pulled all of his ingredients together and created the paint, and then went back out the following year to talk with these same artists who gave him all of this input. So he went ahead and did that, and found all of these wonderful artists all over the world and showed them the paint, allowed them to use it, and everything kind of lined up. The stars aligned, and then artists started using the paint in their work, in their workshops, and he started getting credit from them in their artwork. So things were really starting to build. So 1998 rolls around, and Dan decides that he wants to expand the line. And he wants to do something that would be completely and totally unique to anyone else in watercolor. And that was to take colors that were popular with ancient civilizations and make them available for artists of today. So we're talking about societies like the Egyptians and the Mayans, basically all of these folks that you see down here in the bottom right. So the Mayans, the Egyptians, Incans, Plains Indians, Inuits, and some of the other ancient peoples. So for instance, the Plains Indians really loved turquoise. And they would take turquoise and then they would grind it finely, and then they would mix it with animal fat And then this became their war paint for their faces and also their horses. So that was one example. The Egyptians loved lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is actually sourced from Afghanistan, but because where Egypt was on the trade routes, this became a very, very popular mineral because the Egyptians would not only use it for paint, but they would also use it for fabric dye. And anybody who was really wearing this was pretty well to do in society, because even back then, this was a very expensive mineral to be able to have in your possession. It was very much a societal thing. So all of these wonderful examples throughout history of where the civilizations would use minerals or rocks to create pigment. So Dan wanted to bring these back or make these available for artists of today. But the problem was that the methods that these civilizations used were just a little too primitive. They would not allow him to make the minerals in the quantities in which it would make it viable for him. So he had to come up with a whole different process in order to process these minerals. And he finally figured it out, and he called the process PrimaTek. So PrimaTek is short for primitive technology. So here's kind of an overview of what it looks like from about 30,000 feet. But we'll get into a little bit of detail in terms of how all of this kind of works. So it all kind of starts with this gentleman here. His name is Bruce, and Bruce has been a full-time mineralogist for us at this point for over 30 years. He gets to work with all of our mine owners, and he gets to help us source our products, and we get mineral from all over the world. So when Bruce decides to source mineral, he has to buy it in 15-year increments. So whatever he decides to bring back to the US, he has to be able to buy at least 15 years worth. So why would he buy in such large quantities? And by the way, I am giving away free stuff today for right answers. So hopefully you all are kind of paying attention. So if you think you have the right answer, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the comments, and my good friends at Plaza will kind of intercept those for me. So so why do you think we buy in 15-year increments? Why would that be important? I'm looking at the chat as well.
Oh, yeah. Lauren, you're muted, by the way. This is Jessica. It looks like everyone's answering with consistency, color consistency. Lisa,
that is correct.
First.
Lisa, you are the first to answer. So what I just showed you was the Daniel Smith 266 color dot card. So that will be coming to you free of charge. Please feel free to DM Lauren or Jessica here, and we'll get your address and we'll get one of those in the mail. So stay tuned. There's going to be 2 other ones coming. What would be the second reason why we would order in such large quantities? This has to do more with an economic thing or an economic aspect. Supply, Wendy? Nope, it's not supply. Scale? Nope. Save money, and Webster, you are the winner of the second dot card. Yes. So here's what happens. When you keep a constant supply on hand, what happens is it helps you to keep your costs flat. So when we have that scenario, it helps us so that we don't have to constantly raise our prices. So it also makes it so that we don't have to endure the big fluctuations in terms of what we're seeing out there. All right, what's the third thing for another dot card? All right, so we've already discussed that it's an economic thing. Actually, it is partially, yes, it is partially to do with logistics. So when we keep 15 years worth of supply on hand, it helps us to ride out when there are problems with the supply chain. So when we see that things happen like COVID, we did not have any problems with COVID whatsoever, because not only did we keep enough mineral on hand, we also kept 15 years worth of pigment, gum arabic, and even distilled water on hand, even 15 years worth of tubes on hand. And that was to help us ride out if there was ever a situation with supply chain. But it also ties in with the fact that we always want to be in stock, and we want to be good vendors to folks like Plaza. We want to be able to supply them product at a really high rate. So really for all of the reasons that I see in here in your comments, really dovetails why we keep so much supply on here. Lauren, is there any questions I can answer at this point?
Yeah, actually, Constance is asking, how did you come up with the number of years? And Sharon also says, why 15 years?
So 15 years for us, when we look at it, it's from a come from a resource point of view, but it also has to do with the fact that we want to have a good long run with it. So imagine what would happen if we only had the color for like 2 years. So pretty much it comes down to what we feel is a good number for us to offer to the market. Because you got to remember, like when we're talking about minerals, this is finite stuff. So we have to make sure that we keep enough of it on hand to make sure that it lasts beyond what we think is reasonable.
Gloria is asking, do materials deteriorate over time?
Not usually. The products that go into making our paint are all pretty what we'd consider to be stable or neutral. So gum arabic is very neutral over time. Certainly distilled, our supply of distilled water is neutral. Tubes, we keep them in an area that's very dry so that aluminum doesn't rust over time. So basically, everything that we use that we need for 15 years worth of supply, we make sure that it's a stable product and that it's something that we won't have to worry about deteriorating in the 15 years in which we have it. All right, let's get back to it. Oops, we went a little far here. So when we go ahead and make a production run, basically what we do is we take the mineral, and a lot of times the mineral is huge. It could be as big as your kitchen table. And what Bruce does is that he makes sure that it arrives to Seattle, and where we meet it with a truck, and then that mineral gets taken to its special place in our warehouse. And when we're ready to make a production run of it, we'll break off a piece about the size of a watermelon, and we'll put it in our first mill, which is what you see down there in the bottom left, which is what we call a jaw mill. And what that jaw mill does is that it puts gentle pressure on the mineral and causes it to break into pieces that are about this size. So about the size of your fist. So it puts gentle pressure on there, and we'll get about 10 to 12 pieces that are this size, and they'll fall out the bottom. And then from there, we take it to our next mill, which is what we call a hammer mill. So the hammer mill looks like this. Whoops, too far. Looks like this here, right here at the top. It has a spinning blade, and that blade gently removes the part of the mineral that we can't use. So for instance, if we look at this piece of lapis here, all of this gray that you see, we have to figure out how to remove. So what that hammer mill does is that it precisely removes the part of the mineral that we can't use and leaves us with the part of the mineral that we can use. So now most of the time we're talking about pieces that are this size. So remember, we started out something this size, and then we went to this, and now we're talking about pieces that are this size.
Scott, there is one question. Jamie asks, is this just the process for PrimaTek line?
Correct. So the way in which we make paint for mineral-based colors versus synthetic colors is different. So we're just exclusively talking about colors that are made from minerals at this point. All right. Get on back. Oops, that keeps happening. All right, so after the hammer mill, we go to really where I think all of the magic happens for us. And it happens in this mill called a ball mill. And what it is, it's a spinning cylinder. And then on the inside it has about 1,000 or so ball bearings. And we load these small little pieces of mineral on the side, and we turn this machine on. And basically the mineral tumbles against all of those ball bearings, and it causes it to break into something that is really, really, really small. Basically, it breaks it into what we call 40 microns. So a micron is a very, very, very small unit of measure, or a micron is a very small unit of measure. So 40 microns, just to give you some perspective on how thick that is, if you look at one of your handouts here and feel the thickness of it, this is 100 microns. So 40 microns is actually about half the diameter of a human hair, and is actually the smallest that our eye can actually pick up. So literally what we're talking about here is something that is about the size of a grain of sand. So, and what's crazy is even though we make that so small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So that could be the beautiful granulation that you see here with zoisite, or it could be the shimmer that we get out of our kyanite color. So the key for us is to make it small enough that we can use it for pigment, but not so small that we lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So this ball mill is really critical for that. So it helps us to preserve the crystal structure, which allows us to see all of the beautiful things about the mineral.
So Scott, oh, sorry, who was that?
Oh, no, it's just me, Jessica. I was just asking the question about the Mayan blue.
Mayan blue.
Is it actually made of this palygorite? I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
All right, so, oh, here we go. Yep, I see Heather's question. So the Mayan colors are really interesting. So the Mayans had a process in which they would make color from. They had a particular type of clay, which I believe that is what Heather is referring to. And what it is that they would then take various materials and inject them inject them with certain things to create the color. So Mayan blue, for example, is that particular type of clay that is infused with indigo, and that's how they made the color Mayan blue. They also had a bright red color that they would go ahead and use. So that same clay. And then there was a particular type of beetle that when they smashed it, actually produced this super bright color, super bright red. So then they would take that and then mix it with the clay, and it made Mayan red. But they had a number of colors that they could do that with. So the Mayan colors were more about a process than about a mineral itself. Yep, Sean, you're absolutely right. That name was escaping me, but that's exactly what it is. Okay.
I don't think you answered, but Gloria's asking that she sees masked people working. Are the minerals toxic?
It's just to protect the workers from dust. So even though the mineral itself is safe to be around, it's not always so great to be around the dust in terms of the heaviness that can leave a feeling in your lungs. So kind of like breathing dust for too long. Like if you're hiking and it's extremely dusty, it's not that the dust itself is toxic, or the contents of the dust. It just makes it easier to breathe. No, but none of the minerals that we work with are what we'd consider to be toxic. Okay. So we only have 3 ingredients to our paint. So we have the mineral or the pigment, distilled water, and gum arabic. So let me ask you this: to win another dot card, where does gum arabic come from? What is it?
Jamie says tree.
It does come from a tree, but what specifically from a tree?
Gloria says plant gum. Sean says sap.
Sean is correct. It is sap. So, for another dot card, what tree does it come from? Heather is right. It comes from the acacia tree. So, Heather, did we already give Heather a dot card?
No, I do not have Heather.
Heather was quick to say nope. Good job, Heather. Yes, absolutely. It comes from the acacia tree. So the vast majority of the world's gum arabic actually comes from the Sudan, and basically, from there they have to wait for the tree to become 10 years of age before they can harvest the sap. So it's a great product. We use it as a binder, in case those of you who don't know what gum arabic and art materials for. We use it as a binder. So that's what keeps all of our ingredients together. So that's what binds the distilled water and the pigment together. So it kind of holds everything in. So, but gum arabic is definitely a very interesting product in the sense that it's used in a lot of things. It's used in soda, it's used in foods, and what it does is it's used to create texture. So I see Kira has a question about preservatives. We do not add any preservatives to our paint. So one thing that's also kind of good for using distilled water is that when you don't have impurities in your water, it's less prone to things like mold and things like that. So one of the reasons why we use distilled water instead of tap water. So that's a good question. What are the advantages of using distilled water instead of tap water? What does tap water have in it that we may not like? Yep. Drugs, Sharon, really? Yes, minerals. It has the potential to have calcium in it. So any of you who have hard water, you know that that it has. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. So one of the things that it might have is hard water. So calcium is the product that goes ahead and kind of builds up on our shower curtains. So anyway, so all of these things are not really great for our process, because what ends up happening is it creates what we call variables. And variables are things that we're trying to take out of our process because we want to be able to get to the same result every time we make a batch of paint. So when you have things like calcium and other metals and things like that, it really gets in the way of producing a product that is consistent. So we choose to use distilled water. Now, the other thing to consider is when you use distilled water, at least for us as artists, what would be the advantages of doing that? Well, one of the things that I saw when I kind of did a comparison was that with the distilled water, the color was actually a little bit more vibrant. So if you look at the diagram there where it says tap water, you see multiple colors of different things. Those kind of represent the contaminants or the variables in the paint making process. So you actually see less pigment molecules, which is what you see in the blue dots, which you see a lot more of in the picture where it says distilled. So you might want to try a cup of tap water and a cup of distilled water when the next chance you have to kind of explore and play around and see if you can spot the differences. All right. So now that we have our ingredients in these vessels that you see there at the top, we take it down to our mixing station. So the picture there of that mixer is actually one of our smaller ones. That one is actually in our lab, but the one that we actually use for production is really quite large. And the way that it works is that we raise it up 16 feet tall, so very, very high. And then it has a rod that comes down. And then at the end of the rod, there is a blade. And when we turn the machine on, the blade is actually what churns the paint. We churn the paint at a really, really, really high rate of speed. And what ends up happening is it ends up drawing air into the mixture of the paint. So it does a really good job of mixing up the paint, but there are two things that happen that really we have to fix later on. The first thing that happens is that it changes the texture of the paint. So what you have is when you interject the air, it kind of makes it like a smoothie. And, you know, if you notice when you put your ingredients like in your blender for a smoothie, that it causes the ingredients to rise. And that happens because you're interjecting air into the process. So it causes it to rise. So at the end of this point, the paint is more like a heavy whipped cream. So it's not really a great thing that we want to put in tubes at this point because the tube would really feel like it had air in it. So we have to figure out a way to fix that. The second problem that we have when we do this is that when you blend paint together at a high rate of speed, it creates static electricity and it causes the paint particles to want to clump. So we have to figure out how to remove that out of the process as well. And we have a machine for that, and it feels like we have a machine for everything at this point. But it's called a dispersion mill, or more commonly known as a 3-roll mill. So basically, it has 3 cylinders, and each of the cylinders spins in the opposite direction. So cylinder number 2 is going to spin this way. Cylinder number 2 is going to go the opposite way, and then cylinder number 3 is going to go clockwise again. So the paint comes up and over cylinder number 1, where it hits cylinder number 2, which is spinning in the opposite directions, and it causes a tearing effect on the particles so that the gum arabic can get in between the pigment particles and the distilled water. And then the same thing happens again when it hits cylinder number 3. So depending upon the color that we're talking about determines how many times it needs to go through that mill. Head on back here. So here's just a few different views of what it looks like. So in the back there, we're looking at it, the machine from basically the front, which is where the paint comes out. And then all the way in the back is where you would load the paint. So the paint travels on those cylinders and then it comes out over here. And this area here, where the triangle is what we call the apron. And that's where the paint exits the mill. Here's a better look. This is the machine operator actually loading from the back. And then there's a gentleman in the front there who is capturing the paint as it comes off of the mill. So from there, we go to our tube filling process. And this is the only piece of automation that we have in our entire process. Everything that you see so far, whether it be with our minerals or using synthetic pigment, is extremely manual. So whereas a lot of manufacturers might use a lot of automation in that part of in the synthetic part of the process, we keep it as manual as possible. And we really try to take a small batch approach, because there are certain things that we can do with small batches of paint that you can't do when you use large or big pieces of automation in the process. So the way that the tube filling machine works is that you have a carousel that comes up to that, and the crimp is open, and then there is a tube that goes down into the tube itself, or the like a straw, and it injects the tube with the right amount of paint. And then it comes out the other side, and then we have a person who will go ahead and put the crimp on the tube, and also stamp what we call a batch number there. So the batch numbers are really important to us, because this is how we monitor our paint and log our paint from batch to batch. And this is super important, because let's say, for example, we had a tube of hematite here, and you went ahead and you bought a tube of hematite, and you went through it, and then you bought another tube, and it didn't look the same. So what you could do is you could call Daniel Smith and give us the two batch numbers. And what we'll do is we'll pull out the paint outs, and we'll compare the different batches, and we'll put the paint out side by side, and that'll help us to determine if we potentially have a problem or not. But the vast majority of the time, for us, you're really going to get one of two answers. Either you're going to get, hey, Scott, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. We're going to go ahead and look into it, and we'll get back to you. But 99% of the time, what usually happens is they're going to come back to you and say, hey, Scott, is it possible that your brush wasn't clean? So we're very much sticklers for consistency. And one of the ways that we do that is we assign batch numbers to everything we make, so that we can come back to it later on and compare if we ever have a problem. All right.
We
Do
have
we have
a
any
couple
questions?
we have actually quite a few here.
Excellent.
So let me start with we have, how long does the paint last?
So it depends in the way in which you store it. So on average, we say that our our paint has a shelf life of 5 years, but it's actually can be much longer than that, depending upon the way that you store it. So the way that we recommend that you store paint is always on its side, not vertical, and always in a place where the temperature doesn't change or there's not large swings in temperature. So the best way to make your paint last is to make sure that you store it correctly.
Okay. And then we also have here, how many pounds of mineral is it needed for 15 years? I guess it also depends on the mineral, but.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one to answer, because there's not a formula that we're able to really reference and to really know how much we're going to get out of a particular batch. So sometimes we'll have to end up going back to that mine owner in order to make sure that we ensure that we keep a 15-year supply on.
And then we also have, how do you store your tubes of paint?
So My paint for the work that I do, I always try and lay them down, but I have a little different challenge than you do there on the East Coast. When I'm done with my paint, what I try to do is to put it in a place that is kind of in a darker part of my studio, so that it's not getting a lot of obviously a lot of direct sunlight, but also that the temperature isn't spiking and dropping and spiking and dropping.
Another question we have here is, does the gum arabic come in a fluid or solid? Is the sap solidified?
So it comes out and it's really kind of viscous, very thick, and then it's heated. And then when we're able to remove, or when the gum arabic manufacturer removes the impurities out of it, he processes it down to a place where it's almost like syrup, pretty much. It's almost like the consistency of like pancake syrup.
Do you have any tours of your factory?
We used to in the past, but unfortunately, I think COVID might have made that impossible at this point. It's, we have to think about what we expose our workers to, and our workers are really everything. We can't make our paint unless we have our workers. And with the way that COVID kind of changed things, I just don't ever see us going back to doing tours, unfortunately.
Okay. How do you this is a great question here. How do you define granulating? Constance swatched the rhodonite genuine and found that it was granulating, though it's listed as non, if she's reading that correctly.
In the color chart?
Yes.
It should not be granulating. It is, generally speaking, we try, we want our color chart to be accurate. I would reach out to, I would be happy to reach out to Constance and have a offline conversation with her to kind of figure out what's going on there.
Okay. And then is there an advantage to using dried paint versus on a palette versus directly from the tube?
Not for us. Our colors re-wet beautifully. We don't seem to have a color or excuse me, a problem with when our paint dries to re-wet it, and it generally comes back to really the same consistency and the same intensity. So we're very lucky. All of our colors re-wet very well.
And I have one last question here. Are the dot cards made by hand?
Yes, they are made by hand. We have a person in our factory, and that's what she does. So her job is to dot out by color all 266 of those colors that you see.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's head on back here. So everyone always wants to know about light fastness and how is it determined? Well, we have a machine that helps us to determine what the light fastness rating of our colors are, and it's called a xenon phaedometer. So it's that machine that you see here in the top left. And the way that it works is that it has a carousel on the inside, so you can see that black and white cutout. And on the inside there is a carousel. And down the middle of that carousel, there's a rod that comes down, and there's a light bulb in the middle of it. And that light bulb is what we call a xenon light bulb. So xenon produces some of the brightest light that man can create. And what it does is it projects light, an intense amount of light, onto those what we call paint outs, which are these things right here. And based upon the amount of fade they see after the process, helps us to determine the light fastness rating of the colors. So these machines can actually replicate 120 years of light exposure in 4 days. So think about that. That's kind of crazy. So 120 times 365, and we can replicate that in 4 days. So at the end of the 4 days, we take out those paint outs. And like I mentioned, we put them next to a template. And then based upon the amount of fade that we see, that helps us to determine what the light fastness rating is of all of our colors. Does anybody have any questions about light fastness?
Don't see any right now. Oh, wait. Wait, there's one. Regarding the staining rating, does this also relate to liftability?
We're gonna, when we get to the color chart, we're gonna talk all about those characteristics. So we also have a machine that helps us to be consistent from batch to batch. So, and we use what's called a photospectrometer. So a photospectrometer, what it does is that the way the process works is that there's a black handle that you see on the front of the machine there. And we go ahead and we take a little chunk of one of our paint outs and we put it in the window and close the machine. And then the machine sends a bright light into the top of the paint out or on top of the pigment. And then it measures the light intensity going back to the machine, and it assigns it a value. So let's say we're talking about Sleeping Beauty turquoise, for example. So let's say Sleeping Beauty turquoise is a 75. That's the value it assigned to it. So for us, every batch of paint has to come in at either 74, 75, or 76. If it falls out of that range, then we scrap the entire batch of paint. So that's how we're able to be consistent from batch to batch, because we have a benchmark, and then every batch of paint after that has to fall within that range.
I actually have a question. I'm familiar with Sleeping Beauty turquoise myself personally. And I think that the mine itself has been closed to the general public, but you guys must have a different source for it, right?
Not a different source. We just, you're correct. That mine closed in 2006. The jewelry industry really loves Sleeping Beauty turquoise. It comes from Sleeping Beauty mine in Arizona. But what ended up happening in 2006, the mine actually closed because it was actually mined all the way to the water table. So the mine flooded and we're no longer able to get turquoise out of it. So that begs the question. I mentioned earlier that minerals are a finite thing. So one of the things that's amazing with our owner is that he seems to know where all of the pockets are of where things that he wants to make sure he has on hand for a while. So Sleeping Beauty turquoise, he found the last remaining stockpiles of it. And we're still sitting on a sizable chunk of Sleeping Beauty turquoise today, but that is going to be one of those ones in the future where when it runs out, we're probably going to let it go and not make a synthetic version of it.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you.
All right, let's head on back. All right, let's talk about granulation. There was a question about that earlier, and I wasn't trying to be evasive, but I knew it was coming, so because I knew I would get back to it later. So let's talk about granulation and what it is. So granulation is this textured effect that we see here. Oops. Let's head on. This is it here. Let's talk about it here. So let's look at this here. This is a green apatite. So what we're talking about with granulation is this textured effect. So the way this happens is it's the specific weight of the particles of the mineral itself. So it's heavier than the gum arabic and distilled water that it sits in, and it wants to flow into the tooth of the paper while the gum arabic and distilled water floats on top. And when you get that scenario, it leaves behind this textured effect, which is what we call granulation. So granulation, I think, is really interesting because it adds an extra dimension to things that you want to make look natural. So if we're talking about foliage or leaves or things like that, these are great colors for that because it makes colors look a little bit more natural. So I find that using colors that granulate in a natural setting creates a look that I can't replicate with a brush or a pen. It has a whole look in and of it in and of itself. So, and another thing to note is that we don't add anything to the paint to make it do this. This is all natural because of the weight of the pigment particles. Okay. Other examples of granulation that we have that I think are pretty are this color here called bloodstone. So it creates a very interesting and unique type of granulation that almost looks leather-like. There's also a color called serpentine, which also kind of has a different granulated look also. So that's one of the things that I think is interesting, specifically with our mineral-based colors, is that they add an extra dimension with granulation. So the other thing to note also is that even with synthetic pigments, we can make granulate. So when we buy synthetic pigments, we buy it in the largest possible chunk that we could buy it in. And that gives us the freedom to either make a synthetic color granulate or not granulate. So we love having the option to create unique and different colors simply just by using a different particle size. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about quinacridone for a moment. So quinacridone is a family of pigments. I'm going to go ahead and move out of here for a second so I can show you these. So synthetics are a family of pigments. They're largely considered to be one of the super pigments of our time. They are very unique and different in terms of their look, their light fastness, and just the beautiful range of color that we can get from these. So the big question I always get is, what does that word quinacridone mean? So somebody tell me what does quin mean in Latin? 5. Yep, Jamie, you're absolutely right. So quin means 5 in Latin. Cridone in Latin means rings. So if we go back here and look at our diagram of quinacridone, you see 5 rings. So if you look here under the word quinacridone, you see that there are 5 rings here. So that's where that word comes from. So quinacridone, just like I mentioned, is a family of pigment, just like phthalo and perylines are different families of pigment, and it describes really what the building blocks of those pigments are. So a perylene pigment will have a different molecular set of building blocks than quinacridone would. So quinacridone has this look under a microscope. So you would see 5 rings. So that's where that word comes from. What is it made from? Well, it's made from things that actually show up on a periodic chart. It's not crazy stuff that we can't pronounce. It's made from stuff like hydrogen and carbon and oxygen, all in those specific quantities under intense amount of heat, and it creates the quinacridone pigment. So what's really great about, what I think is great about, just from a functional point of view about quinacridone, is just how bright and beautiful the colors are. The vast majority of them are non-granulating. So what's really great with these is that they make great and clean color mixes, as well as they're great for layering color. So these colors are fantastic to work with other transparent colors with, to build color and to build depth. So everyone always asks also about how do you get these big swings, this big range of color? Well, if we go back and look at that diagram again, you see lines that are on those particular rings. So if we look here and you look under the fourth ring above and below it, and then on the second one above and below it, chemists are able to move those lines around. They call them markers. And when they do that, it changes the way that light refracts. And when you change the way that light refracts, our eyes interpret a different color. So think about a crystal for a moment, and you put it up to the sunlight. Depending upon the way that you change the angle on the crystal, changes the color in which we see. So it works the same way with pigment. So depending upon where they put those markers, it changes the way that light refracts, and we see a different color because of it. So we're one of the few manufacturers anymore that does have quinacridone colors. You may have heard a lot about that recently, specifically about quinacridone burnt orange, for example. There are several other paint manufacturers that have had to move away from it because the pigment, or the quinacridone pigments, are being discontinued. So the big question is, why are they being discontinued? Well, 99.9% of all of the colors that we have as artists revolve around the fact that the automotive industry is the key driver in the colors that you and I have to work with as artists. So when the automotive industry decided to move away from quinacridone colors, it really pulled the supply away from paint manufacturers to continue to make quinacridone colors. So before everyone has a freak out moment, our owner found the last remaining stockpiles of quinacridone pigment, and we have enough for all of our colors to last for the next 20 years. So we're going to have a nice long run with these beautiful pigments. Is there any questions about quinacridone?
That was, I think, you answered one actually about that being discontinued. So from Kirsten, but there is a question Wendy has,
Yeah.
not about quinacridone, but do alternative substrates than paper react differently to granulation?
Granulation really is dependent upon the amount of tooth or the texture of whatever the surface is. It will have a different look. It'll still granulate, but depending upon the substrate itself, it may present itself a little bit differently. So if it's a smoother surface, you might see a more concentrated version of granulation. Or if those particles, or what I call the peaks and valleys of the texture, if there are more of that, then we tend to see the granulation become more amplified.
Now Constance has a question. Does Daniel Smith partner with any watercolor paper companies?
Not specifically. When we make our paint outs, we use a company called Lana, short for Lawn Aquarel. It's kind of a lesser known paper company. But the reason why we use it is that we really like the consistency of the sizing, and the sizing is important because it's what creates the barrier between the paint and the fibers of the paper. So we found that that particular company, when it comes to making our lab paint outs, is what we choose to use. Now, if you're going to ask me personally, you might have noticed that you have the Fabriano Artistico in your kit. I really love the Artistico because a lot of, for the same reasons, like we like to use Lana for our paint outs. I've always found the Artistico to be very consistent with the sizing. It uses a vegetable-based sizing that is more consistent than I find with other manufacturers who use an animal-based sizing, for example. I love the texture on Artistico. I feel like it provides kind of the best of all worlds in terms of being able to have texture without the texture being too aggressive. But Fabriano is to me personally has been a great partner, and they're certainly the first paper I reach for when I do work.
Great. Sharon is also asking if you could repeat the statement about the auto industry's influence over color, and is this international?
It is international. So basically what you have going on is that the pigment world is very much caters to three very large industries. So the industry that uses the most pigment is the automotive industry, and it wields the most amount of influence in terms of the colors that we have available to us. The second one is the house paint industry. The house paint industry is the second largest user of pigment. And then the third one is the plastics industry. So those three industries have the most to say about what pigments are made available to us as artists. So for instance, in the overall picture of things, the art materials industry only accounts for 0.1% of the overall pigment that is produced. So because of that, the pigment manufacturers, notice I'm making a distinguishment between a pigment manufacturer and a paint manufacturer, that the automotive industry is the one that if they decide to pull out of a particular group of color, it usually affects the rest of us because they are such power users of pigment in general.
Great. Kira has a question now. So many great questions today. Thank you all. Mm-hmm. Do you sophisticate any of your colors in PrimaTek? I'm not sure what that means. Scott, if you need clarification, Kira, if you want to unmute, feel free and expand. I'm not sure what that means. Kira, are you able to expand on your question? Adulterate. Do you adulterate any of your colors in PrimaTek?
No, we do not. So basically the way that we're able to get to certain tones is that we adjust the amount of mineral that we put into our formulation, and that helps us to get from one tone to another depending upon what we want. So meaning if we want a more intense color, we'll just add more mineral to it in order to create the intensity or the tone that we're looking for. Okay. All right, let's head on back here. Okay. So here's just kind of a look at our range of quinacridone colors, just to kind of reiterate those. So we have 14. We have more quinacridone colors than any other manufacturer in their line, and we're also probably going to end up being one of the very few that will still have quinacridone colors in their range. I also want to talk about a line of colors that is kind of interesting and different, and we call these our enviro-friendly colors. And basically what they are is we source pigment from a manufacturer who basically is able to collect the iron oxide from streams and other bodies of water from the coal mine industry. Coal mining is an industry where there is a lot of runoff, and we work with a pigment pigment company that collects these iron oxides from the water, and we're able to use them as pigments. So we have 3 colors or 3 different shades of pigment that we get from these folks here, and they look like this. So we have an enviro-friendly yellow iron oxide, we have a red iron oxide, and we also have a brown iron oxide. So we do try and be try to be cognizant, and if we see that there are pigments like this out in the world that actually promote a kind of more of a healthy environment, and we get to use or make these very different colors available to us, then we do. Hold on just one second. I'm getting some feedback here. Sorry about that. Can't predict when the neighbor is going to decide to run his lawnmower. So anyway, we have those 3 enviro-friendly colors, and they're very unique. And I suspect that we're going to see more of these types of colors in our line in the future. Okay, just going to run through a few of our colors that are made from minerals that are kind of interesting and unique. Amazonite is a color that we get from Brazil. The mineral actually looks like this. There's a live look at it. It's a beautiful color, beautiful turquoise. It's actually great for creating cool streams, clouds. It has granulation associated with it, so you can get some nice texture. I showed you bloodstone earlier, but we'll come back to it. So this is bloodstone here. Get a better look.
Are all the PrimaTek colors single pigment, Scott?
PrimaTek colors are all single pigment. We don't add anything to them in order to make the color. So it's the reason why when we get to the color chart, why you don't see pigment numbers. You just see where it says genuine, which tells you that it comes from a mineral. Cool. Okay. Let's move along. All right, let's talk about our color chart. So hopefully everyone has a color chart there with you. In case you don't, I'll have it here. So I think this is going to answer a lot of questions for you folks who had this question earlier about staining and things like that. So just to go over kind of the layout of the color chart, if you open to the main side, this side here, this is where all of our synthetic colors are. So all of our colors that come from a lab, or some of them might actually come from the earth, but they are colors like umbers, and they're not derived from minerals. So you'll find all of those colors on this large side. Now, if you flip it over and look at the top, this is where all of our PrimaTek colors are. So this is where all of the colors that are made from minerals are located. Down below it, you have what we call our luminescent colors. So these are colors that are interference, iridescent, and what we call duochrome colors. So that's kind of the layout of the color chart. We'll get into a little bit more detail here. I'm just going to forward us along. So we talked about these are some of our synthetic pigments. And we talked about these are the PrimaTek. Anytime you see PrimaTek, that means that these are the mineral-based pigments. And then down below it, these are the luminescent. So let's talk about some of these luminescent colors. So the one question that everybody always has a question about is, what are these duochrome colors that you speak of? So what these colors are is that they bounce between two different colors. So if you look at this one here, this is duochrome saguaro green. So on the left side of the paper, you have it leaves behind kind of a brownish shade. But what's interesting is that when you have it on the black side, which we used a black watercolor ground, you actually see almost a green metallic. So the way this works is that the mica is oxidized in a particular way to where it bends light. And when it bends light, that's why we're able to see the two different colors that you see here. So that is a duochrome color. Here's a look without all of the wording in there, less cluttered. The other question I get is, what's the difference between iridescent and interference pigments? So an iridescent color, it's reflection. The particle of light hits the paint pigment matrix and bounces back, much like a mirror. So when it talks about the matrix, we're talking about the actual mica. And the mica is oxidized in a way that makes the light bounce back to our eyes like the way a mirror would. An interference color uses refraction. So the particle of light, the light goes through the mica and then bounces back from the substrate through the mica, where the mica scatters the light. And then that's why we're able to see fluorescence, metallics, and other colors. It's because of the way that the light is refracted through the mica. So those are the difference between iridescent and interference colors. All right, so let's go back to the color chart. If you could get your color chart back open there and go back to the main side. And if you go to the very top and look next to the word watercolor, you see this box that says color information. So it's going to be right up here at the top. So right next to the word watercolor. So what that color information box is telling you is that all of the information flows from left to right. The next piece of information we give you is, what is the color available in? Is it available in what format? So for us, these are the formats we have our colors available in. One is a 15 mil tube. We also have a 5 mil tube. We have a watercolor stick, and we have a half pan. So it kind of looks like this. So here on the left, you have our 15 mil tube, a watercolor stick in the middle, a 5 mil tube, and a half pan. So the question that I get a lot is, what is a watercolor stick? So what the watercolor stick is it's the mineral or the pigment and the gum arabic, and that's it. So there's no water added to this. So what you have here is a really, really, really concentrated stick of color. So what this really amounts to is 3 full pans of watercolor, or 6 half pans. So this is an extremely concentrated stick of color. So why would you want this? So if you're like me, you travel a lot on airplanes, and I have to carry tubes. And I don't know if any of you have carried tubes on planes. But what's the one thing you notice when you get off the plane, when you go to open that tube of paint? What happens?
Jamie says explode.
Yes, Jamie, you're absolutely right. It wants to spurt out. So the reason why that happens is that when you take your tubes of paint on an airplane, pressure builds up in the tube, and then it's not relieved until you actually open the tube up. And when that happens, because the tube is under pressure, that's what causes all of the paint to kind of want to explode and spurt out. So what's really nice about these is that they're dry. So all you need to do is when you get to where you're going is just add a little bit of water, and then it has the same load of pigment as a 15 ml tube of watercolor without all of the mess. So these are extremely handy to travel with. So when I was traveling to Europe last fall, I took my watercolor sticks with me, and I was actually able to paint on the plane because number one, they're not a liquid, and two, they're just easier to travel with. So the other cool thing about these also is that they're all single price point. Every single color is the same price. So how can we use these? So a couple different ways. You can, scrape the stick into a palette and add water. You can cut them up and actually use and put them in half pans. Or you can do what I've kind of grown accustomed, or what I've kind of liked doing now is that I'll actually take the sticks and I'll put them between my fingers like this. And I'll take my brush and I'll pull the paint directly from the sticks and go directly to paper. So one thing I definitely want to talk about is when you use these were never designed to be a drawing material. They don't have any sort of wax associated with them. So somebody tell me what is the nature of sap? What does sap feel like? Sticky, yes, Carol. So it's sticky. So so when you go ahead and you take the stick and you put it to paper, I'm just going to briefly change my camera here so that I can show you a little bit. We're going to go here. So what you notice is when you go to glide the pigment or the watercolor stick on the paper is that it's sticky, and it's true to form, right? Because we said sap is sticky. That's what gum arabic is made from. So it wants to be very sticky on the paper. So it doesn't really have a great feel for being a drawing material. The other downside too is because of the sap, it wants to really really embed itself in the paper. So it's kind of hard to remove the kind of what I call the sedimentation there out of the paper. So because of that, we don't recommend it to be, to use it as a drawing material. So the way that it works best is that when either you scrape the paint or the stick into a palette, or go ahead and take the paint directly from the stick and then go to paper, and it leaves behind a very consistent laydown of color. So these are wonderful to travel with. No mess, no mess while you're traveling, easy to work with, all single price point, just great to travel with. All right. So let's head on back.
Question from Jennifer.
Yeah.
What is the shelf life of the sticks?
Just as long as our tubes. So the sticks, when they're not exposed to extreme heat, they have the same life expectancy as our tubes would.
And Carol is asking, what's the difference between watercolor sticks and watercolor pencils?
Usually watercolor pencils have a small amount of wax in them, which encapsulates the pigment on watercolor pencils. So it because of that wax, it has a different laydown. So it's watercolor pencils are definitely have a much smoother laydown than the watercolor sticks do. And I see Kirsten has a question. Yes, Kirsten, they can melt if you leave them in the sun. All right, let's head on back. All right. So we talked a little bit about watercolor sticks. We've actually expanded our palette. We have 62 colors available in these now.
And I'm just going to interject. You can special order those from us. I don't think we have them stocked in the stores at this point, but you can always ask us and we can order those from Plaza for anyone who wants those.
Yeah, and the other thing to note also is that we have just recently came out with sets. So if you're looking for a way to get started with the watercolor sticks, we have a couple different sets that you can look at. All right, so this is a look at our half pans. We use a 3-stage approach. We do this to maximize the amount of pigment that's available in these. We basically let the, we do our first pour, we let the water evaporate, and then we pour again, let it evaporate, and then we finish it off with the third pour. All right, back to the color chart here. Next, we're going to talk about light fastness. So on our color chart, next to available in, you will find where it says LR-ASTM light fastness rating. So for us, any color that has that Roman numeral 1 means that color is light fast beyond 100 years. 2 means that color has very good light fastness and is light fast for 100 years. A 3 is 50 to 70, and for us, any color that is fugitive, meaning that it wants to fade within 15 to 20 years, we give it that 4 rating. So we only have 2 colors in our range that are fugitive. One of them is opera pink, and the other one, which may or may not be a surprise, is alizarin crimson. So why is it important to know what the light fastness rating on your colors is? Or what would be the reason for that? Why would we want to give you that information?
Jamie says they'll fade.
Right. So what would happen if you had colors that had excellent light fastness of 1, and then you interjected it with one that is fugitive? What's going to happen? Well, one color is going to fade, and then the other one is going to be there, and it's going to look extremely odd. So it's important when you choose colors in your palette that you choose colors that have the same light fastness, so that your colors over time will age well together. So, but when you have colors that have various light fastness ratings, they will all tend to fade over different periods of time, which could be, fairly could present a problem over time. All right. Someone asked a question earlier about non-staining or staining. Yes. The question was whether this had to do with lifting techniques, and it absolutely does. So we wanted to help you understand how certain colors were either staining, how staining some of these colors were. So we have a 1 through 4 system. So any color that has a 1 means that color is non-staining. So that means you would be able to lift up 100% of that color. So let's look at this here. This is kind of a good way of looking at it. So you see it there, at the top, we have cobalt violet. So if you look at that, that is the number 1. So that cobalt violet is a non-staining color. So you can tell by the stripe through the color there that we were able to pick up probably nearly 100% of that color. So this color would be really good for if you wanted to create, say we're talking about a blue and we're talking about clouds, and you wanted to do a stippling effect where you wanted to be able to lift colors so that they look like clouds. So you would want to choose a color that was non-staining, because that'll allow you to get the maximum effect. 2, down below it, we call that a low staining color. So an example of that is Hansa Yellow Medium. So we're able to pick up probably in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of that color. 3, down below, that's what we would call a medium staining color. So we're looking at indant throne blue there. So basically you're able to pick up roughly half of that color. Down below it, you have carmine, which is a highly staining color. This is literally like spilling red wine on white carpet. As soon as that color touches the surface, you are not going to be able to lift it. It is that aggressive. So all of this is important because it'll tell you about what colors you can get away with different techniques. So understanding non-staining and staining is just a way to help you to choose colors that'll assist you if you want to do lifting techniques. Is there any questions about staining?
Not at the moment.
All right. So next is we tell you which colors granulate, yes or no. So if it's an N, that means it doesn't granulate. If it's a Y, it means that it granulates in varying degrees. So when we talk about granulating, we're talking about this effect here. Next, we have transparency. So transparency is really important to understand because it is basically a predictor of how that color is going to interact with others. So let me ask you all this. What's going to happen when you blend a transparent color with an opaque color? Whose nature is going to be the strongest? Is it the opaque or the transparent?
The opaque.
The opaque, right? So the second you introduce an opaque color to a transparent color, you lose all of the transparent qualities of that other color. So sometimes we want to be able to layer color, or we want to build color up in order to create depth. Or some of us may even use an underdrawing. So does it make a lot of sense to use an opaque color when you want to see what's going on underneath, or when you want to layer color? No, right? You don't want to, you want to be able to use light colors when you're building up color, and you certainly want to use a transparent color if you want to show an underdrawing or some other detail that you have happening below your color. So understanding transparency is a way to help you to predict how certain colors are going to work with others. Because at the end of the day, what we all want is to have a palette of color that helps us to kind of pull in the same direction so that you can get the result you want. So for us, a fully transparent circle means that color is obviously transparent. A half circle, a half filled in circle means the color is semi-transparent. And then any color that is that darkened circle means that color is opaque.
Kira is asking, do you use ASTM light fastness standard?
Yes. So we have the ability to test light fastness in our own lab, but we also send it out to ASTM, which is kind of the governing body in terms of testing. They are the testing agency for our industry. Most of those tests happen at Duke University, where we test for things like toxicity, and they also do tests for light fastness. So we do our own internal testing, but we also work with an outside source in order to basically get kind of the support of the industry in terms of light fastness and toxicity and things like that, because those are the two things that are really important. We want to make sure our colors last as long as we say they will, and also that that colors are safe to work with. Oops. So here's just kind of a look at transparency and kind of how that might play out visually. So you have quinacridone burnt orange, which is a transparent color. If you look to the right there, you see that the other side is completely black. That's watercolor ground. So this color is painted over the top of the watercolor ground, so you don't see any of the orange. Down below it, you have permanent red, which is a semi-transparent color. So there you can see some of the red. And then down below it, that is actually cobalt green. And then cobalt green is considered to be an opaque color. So, and you can see a lot more of that color over the black. So that's kind of how it looks like from a visual point of view.
Gloria is asking if you could repeat about the first category of color info, the 1-2Y example that's in the chart.
Okay, so if we look at, if you go back and look at the top of the color chart there, I believe what you're asking is all of the information is designed to flow from left to right, I believe is your question. So like from available in, then we flow to light fastness and then to staining. So we're looking at ultramarine blue here. So this is kind of a good one to look at. So the first piece of information, you know, we give you is what the color is available in, or what the format the color is available in. So if we're talking about ultramarine blue, we're talking about that it comes in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, and a half pound. The next piece of info that you see there is the light fastness rating. So ultramarine blue, it has excellent light fast. So this color is going to be light fast beyond 100 years. The number 3 means that this is a medium staining color. So we're going to make note of that when we do lifting techniques. Y, the Y there means that yes, this color granulates in varying degrees. And then that fully open circle means that the color is transparent. So we know that this color would do very well in a color layering situation, as well as if you had underdrawings. Down below it here, where you see PB29, that is actually the pigment information. So P is always going to stand for pigment. B is always going to be the color family from which it comes from. So, and then the 29 means that this is the 29th shade of blue. So what that means is that this information is the pigment information, and it's an international standard. So if you think about like a color wheel, for instance, instead of color families, you would see this. You would see PB29, you would see PB28. Those are actually kind of what we consider to be, if you think about it as like an umbrella, and at the top of the umbrella is PB29. So that's the actual designator of the color, and it's an international standard that's used. But it's mainly given to you as artists so that you understand the pigments that are in play, so that you don't do the one thing that everybody hates, and that's make mud. So if you have the pigment information, it helps you to be more careful about which colors you decide to blend with.
Constance is asking, how do you organize colors as presented on the chart?
They're organized what we call chromatically. So basically, we lay out our color in that way so that you can see both the warm options and the cooler options on both sides of the color. So if you are looking for, say, a red, we show you a cool red and a warm red on each side. So we lay it out that way so that you can see where the warmer and cooler options are.
And Kira is asking, you guys are on fire with your questions. It's fantastic. Do you know about the anomalies Golden uncovered when they tested their pigments?
I'm not all that familiar with what they have going on there. I would definitely refer you to Golden for those questions.
Oh, Constance says, sorry, she means like alphabetically color wheel for the ordering of the colors.
They do it that way because they try to group them by family. So if we look at if we look at the color wheel specifically, we see that it's this way or that way. but it's done a little bit differently when we're actually talking about the pigment information. But it's designed that way in order to be able to give you different options in terms of warmer and cooler options. Yeah, these questions are on fire. You guys, I haven't been challenged like this in quite a while. This is awesome. Okay.
Great job, guys.
Yep. All right. Let's head on back here. I just want to make sure that's the end of that. So I saw that there were a few other questions there. Why don't we hit those before I dive into a couple other things? All right. So, all right. It is what I got 15 minutes, right, Lauren?
Yes.
All right. Very good. I saw a question about grounds. What are grounds? So basically what grounds are is it's a paste that you can apply to nearly anything. So you can apply it to metal, you can apply it to wood, you can apply it to plexiglass. And basically what this paste does is that it creates a barrier between the paint and the substrate. And what it leaves behind is a texture that is similar to a 140-pound cold press. So what that allows you to do is, let's say you wanted to do watercolor on wine bottles. So what you could do is that you could go ahead and just sand the surface very lightly, and then you could take the paste and apply it. I recommend using a foam brush because the foam brush leaves behind a texture, a consistent texture. And then you allow it to set up for 24 hours. And then that allows you the paste or the ground to cure, so that it'll allow the paint to only absorb to a certain level within the paste. So it does a nice job of replicating what 140-pound cold press has, but you're just using it on a different substrate. So it's a really cool product. If you're interested in that, Plaza definitely has a few of our varieties there. We have them in different colors like buff titanium, titanium white, black, iridescent gold. So we have a nice selection of grounds, and they're pretty handy if you want to try something unique and different. So I thought I would show some of these colors, some of our PrimaTek colors, for those of you that maybe have not seen them before. I'm going to go ahead and I'll turn my camera around here in just a second, but I always like to show this color, Mayan Blue. It's definitely one of my favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this around here. Yeah, now we're back there. So what's really cool with these Mayan colors is just their history, but they also are just really unique and beautiful colors. On just as an aside, they're really deep, they're really beautiful, lots of wonderful depth that you can get from them. They granulate, and they're very bright and they're very intense. But this is the color that really led me to Daniel Smith and really became the one that really got me hooked once I started to use them. Another color in the PrimaTek range that I really like is Green Apatite. Green Apatite showed you it earlier, but it is just a beautiful saturated color. Really great for landscapes and foliage and colors that are like that. It is super intense. That granulation really starts to set up beautifully right away. Get a little bit different light here. This also has a little bit of a two-tone aspect to it. It has a little bit of brown. So, but it's a super versatile color for either doing fall but it can also be versatile enough depending upon how much water you hit it with to be a spring color as well. Because if I keep going out on the color, I can definitely get a brighter hue from it. So that is Green Apatite. Here is Sleeping Beauty Turquoise. So as I mentioned, this comes from the Sleeping Beauty mine in Arizona. And it's really a beautiful color because it's a warm turquoise. It's definitely unique in our line. It has beautiful granulation.
Oh, it's my favorite. I just have to.
Yeah, it is a truly beautiful color. Let's look at Serpentine here as kind of an alternative to the Green Apatite. This could be more of an option if you're thinking about a spring green. But it has great granulation as well, and that'll actually change a little bit as it sets up. It'll actually have a little bit more of a brown hue. Kira, I see you have a question there. You said, do you add anything to make them granulate? Nope. This is all, just like we mentioned before, this all happens because of the specific weight of the mineral particles. And since it's heavier, it wants to flow into the tooth of the paper. And the gum arabic and distilled water floats over the top of the mineral in the tooth of the paper. And what it leaves behind is that granulated look. So we don't add anything to our colors to give it that granulated look. Okay, let's look at a few more here. Let's look at kyanite. I'm going to go ahead and just move that out here. We're going to look at kyanite. All right, so kyanite is a really beautiful Payne's gray blue, but the one thing that it leaves behind, which is really cool, and it might be a little hard with this camera to pick it up, but there is mica associated with this mineral, and it leaves behind a really beautiful shimmer. Here's what kyanite looks like as a mineral, and you can kind of see every once in a while you'll catch a little reflection there. That's the mica, and the mica translates into the paint, which leaves behind a little bit of a shimmer. So that is kyanite. I think I want to show you something that I really like in terms of blends, what I like to kind of play around with. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to Mayan blue. And then I'm going to grab a color that I call secret sauce. Secret sauce, what I mean by that is it doesn't matter what I blend it with. It makes everything good. It's one of my favorite colors to blend with, and its real name, of course, is quinacridone gold. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with the Mayan blue. And I'll just work with that. I'll work it in. A little bit more water here. And then what I'll do is I'll just pick up a little bit of the quinacridone gold. And I get all of these beautiful different colors.
Kira's asking, what about synthetic colors? Do you add something for granulation? Sorry if I missed if you answered that.
No, for us, it all comes about through the particle size. So when we buy synthetic pigment, we buy it in the biggest possible chunk we can get it in. And then that leaves us all of the options of whether we want a color to granulate or not granulate. But even in our synthetic colors, we don't add anything to them to make them granulate. So that makes us a little bit different from some of the others out there.
And Kirsten was asking, do you do any chemical testing for the purity of your minerals?
We do in the sense that when we go and buy our mineral, we do a lot of homework on them ahead of time. So, you know, just like we mentioned before about the whole 15 years thing, we do make sure that whatever mineral we decide to bring in, that it's not a toxicity problem. All of our colors are tested at that same ASTM lab, and we're very cognizant of the fact that we want to be ahead of trends when it comes to toxicity. So all of our minerals, you know, during the process, we're looking at the minerals to make sure that there may not be any future problem with them. So everything that we work with, we make sure that there's not an issue from a toxicity standpoint.
Okay.
All right, I'm just going to show you one more color. So we're going to use green apatite. Come over here. We'll try green apatite again. Work that out. And then I'll come back with that quinacridone gold again.
Yes, Clara. Sorry. While Scott is painting that one out, I'll reiterate the watercolor sticks. Yes, we don't have them available on the website to order, but if you call our customer service line or visit your local store, Plaza Art Store, you can ask and make a request. We can special order the watercolor sticks for you.
All right, so here's what I was able to do with green apatite and quinacridone gold. So here is my palette for creating fall colors. All right, well, we are pretty much at the end here. Are there any more questions that I can answer before we move on?
I did have two I was holding off on. One
Sure.
was the, someone asked about the signature series, if you could expand on those a little bit.
Sure. A number of our brand ambassadors we work with very closely, and we will design colors based upon color mixes that they make to achieve certain things. For instance, like our McCracken Black, we worked with an artist named Lauren McCracken, and he wanted, or he mixes on his own a transparent black from 6 different pigments. So so we saw it as an opportunity to kind of fill a void in our line, and we created that color, and we named it after the artist who gave the idea. So we have a number of other artists that we work with, like Jane Blundell, you know, to do Jane's Black and Jane's Gray. We also have Alvaro, who has his colors. So we do that because a lot of these artists have a large following, and we want to promote something that might be unique to their followers.
That's cool. Constance was asking before about the organization of the colors on the chart. She wants to further clarify a little bit, so I'm going to ask her to unmute and see if she can expand and see if we can get all of her question answered. Constance, I just invited you to unmute.
Thank you. Hi, Scott. Very informative.
Hi.
I love Daniel Smith Colors, and I love all the information. I'm a librarian, And so when I was confronted with this, I was like, okay, why is bismuth vanadate yellow first and, you know, gray titanium basically is last? So part of the way this started, Stacy Lund-Levy, I took a class from her a couple of weeks ago, and she had a list of materials. And I was like, why did she organize it this way? Like, this doesn't make sense. It's not how I would have done it. What don't I know?
Generally speaking, you know, like I mentioned before, we call this a chromatic setup. So basically, you start with yellows, and then you progress the blacks, and then you kind of fill in the colors that fit between those ranges. So if you look at most other manufacturers' color charts, they are always going to start with buff titanium. So buff titanium on the it's kind of on a spectrum scale, is kind of how they lay these out. So they tend to start, you know, colors that are at the top of the light spectrum, and then they work to the ones that are on the opposite end.
Okay, so if I were to have like a spectrometer, for example, is that the right thing? And I used it to look at different colors, and I would get some sort of output from it. That, like, maybe a numerical output would tell me where to wedge it in.
Yes, so that's how we look at it, by the way. You know, that's kind of, you know, I was talking about the photo spectrometer earlier, and that's another way in which we use it, because that photo spectrometer will help us to organize our color chart.
Thank you.
Great.
That helps a lot. It's like the Library of Congress call numbers that it puts out, and you put it out there. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Oh, and I also was the one who had the question about rhodonite genuine. I have time.
Let's connect offline, and let's see if we can figure that one out for you.
Thanks.
Great. Gloria is asking, I think she may have asked before, any hope of resurrection of a Daniel Smith retail store in Seattle?
No, unfortunately not. I think we started very differently than other paint manufacturers. We started off as a retail store and a catalog, versus just becoming a manufacturer and then selling to retail stores. We took the opposite approach, and because of that, over time, Dan Smith, who was our founder, when he retired in 1998, he sold the company to John Cogley, who's the current owner of Daniel Smith, who you have a picture of in your handout there. John's vision for the future of the company was in wholesale, basically selling paint to retailers. But he needed to keep the retail store intact, and the catalog and the website intact, in order to get to a place where he would feel comfortable not having not having the support of that. So now that we've grown as much as we have, we're very comfortable with our retail partners. So we just feel that there wasn't a need to keep the store open, and also maintain a website where we sold product. And it was also the commitment that we made to folks like Plaza, who, you know, gave us a chance. You know, we said, we're gonna, you know, just watch, you know, one day we're gonna, you know, we're not gonna have a catalog, we're not gonna have a retail store, and we're not gonna have a website. You know, that all happened because we're comfortable with our presence out there in the world now. All right.
There are just a couple. I don't know if you have the time, Scott, now.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. There's one other one from Kira that says, what do they use as a humectant or plasticizer, which are standard in most watercolors?
We rely on those sorts of things to give us those qualities from the gum arabic. the combination of the chemical reaction between the gum arabic and the distilled water makes it so that we don't necessarily have to have those things. So in terms of that and questions that are kind of beyond that, I would strongly refer you to danielsmith.com, our customer service, where that question could be referred to our chemists for a better explanation.
Okay, last question, and then any other ones and later, feel free to reach out to events@plazaart.com. We can connect you with Scott, or we'll share his information as well with you. Kirsten is asking, do you have counterfeiting issues?
Not that we're aware of. You know, we only sell to established distributors and retailers. So we're very cognizant of who our partners to, and if we were ever made aware of a counterfeiting problem, we would definitely take action on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. All of you were so great. Love all the questions. We learned so much. I hope you all enjoyed this today, and we look forward to the next one with you, Scott, and hope to see all of you on the next workshop in a couple weeks. Looking forward to it. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Have a good one.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining me
Thank
today.
you.
Great.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.